team. Jerry Krase is an old friend. Our friendship goes back to the 1970s, and we've stayed at each other's houses on occasion, and uh, but Jerry is a fixture in the Brooklyn cultural scene, and he has focused on Little Italies and the urban setting. And Jerry is a sociologist, but we won't hold that against him. And Jerry held the endowed professorship at the Brooklyn College, and he's now the retired or emeritus professorship of the Koppelman fellowship or professorship.
Koppelman. You have to say Koppelman because he gave money to the school, and if you don't pronounce his name correctly, he takes it back.
Oh, okay. That we have that here too, and Jerry has been a active participant in a dozen different organizations, including the former AHA, the current YASA, and he's also been involved in. I never understood it, but visual sociology. I guess the sociologists will actually look at things under visual sociology, as opposed to their previous modus operandi. And he's focused on Little Italies. He's taken a lot of photographs of Little Italies over the generations and written several pieces on that subject. So we'll and he doesn't bear an Italian name, so that's the first thing he'll tell us about. Jerry?
Well, okay. Thank you very much for having me come to Chicago virtually. I've been to Chicago more times than I'm willing to admit. The first time actually I went to Chicago was when I was at Indiana University as an undergraduate in the 1960s. I know I don't look that old, so you can, but I was a baby with my first visit. Now, Dom is absolutely right. Some people refer to me as a visual sociologist, right? And I've had a great deal of difficulty with that topic, even more difficulty explaining to people why I'm involved in Italian American studies or American Italian studies, or why I'm interested in Italy and Italian Americans in general. Now, first of all, it's a subject to me. It's an important academic subject that I do research in. But I know whenever I'm speaking to a group of people, whether they're Italian or Italian American or not, the question always comes up, why, with a name like Krase, no K in the Italian alphabet, why I would be interested. The assumption always is, if you're doing ethnic studies, that you're doing it because you have a personal or a family connection to the subject. That's not the reason I do it, but I do have a very strong connection to not Italian heritage, but Sicilian heritage, all right? And I have to tell you this, my mother's maiden name, I don't know whether we use that term anymore, was Congelosi, spelled many different ways. And her mother's maiden name was Trentacosta. And the family was from Marineo, which is Presa di Palermo. It's near Palermo. It's about 20 kilometers outside. It's a hill town that I visited a couple of times. In fact, a few years ago, I took my whole family, children, grandchildren, even my son-in-laws. I have 3 daughters. I took them all to Sicily for a visit, and we took a day, a trip to Marineo to show them the town. I have lots of photographs of that too. But we're not going to see them today because it would be too difficult to find them. And I took them there to show them the town. I have not made any connections to my relatives that might be in or near that area. But I wanted them to see the town, see where they came from. My grandparents came to the United States basically as children in the 1880s. So very early when we think in terms of Sicilian immigrants, at least in New York City. And they actually lived for quite a while on Elizabeth Street, where there was actually quite a number of people from Marineo, the Italians or Sicilians, tended to not only move to the United States, but move to particular places. I should also say to you that on my wife's side, she's Italian on both sides. And she has, her father's family is from Laurino, which we had visited many years ago, and we actually have made connections to people there. And her mother's family probably from Bari, so that's the connection. So I have those strong connections, but that's not the reason why I do it, right? And I want to tell you right off before I start talking about visual sociology and my work on Little Italy. The reason why I do it is because it is my understanding from my study, and which includes not only looking, but talking to people and reading books and trying to learn history, etc., of Italy and of the United States, that Italian Americans, the ordinary Italian Americans, like my grandparents and maybe like most of your grandparents, etc., and others who came to the United States, made an extremely significant contribution to the United States in terms of building, and especially in terms of cities. Italian Americans, helped build American cities, helped build American railroads, helped build American roads and bridges and canals and reservoirs, etc., all over the United States. And unfortunately, what we tend to do when we do ethnic studies, we tend to focus only on the prominenti. We only talk, focus on the people who have gotten the most attention as far as the press is concerned or politics is concerned. And I tell you quite frankly, although that's significant also, the most important thing in my estimation is what ordinary working people did. Factory workers, people that worked in public services, people that worked in construction industries, and especially the way that they occupied central city areas of the United States. And many of them, not all of them, tended to stay in the centers of these cities long after everybody left, right? And so when we talk about today gentrification and preservation of cities, etc., I will tell you, without a doubt, right? Without a doubt, if it was not for Italian Americans, many, if not most, of those central city areas with the wonderful architecture that everybody now is willing to pay millions of dollars for would not be there, right? Would not be there. And that's true of the Little Italy in Chicago that I have photographed many, many times, near where the Chicago Circle campus is, right? And all over the United States, so that's the reason. And so when it gets to this issue in terms of visual sociology, for me, I'm supposedly an important person in this discipline of visual sociology. I don't think anybody's an important person. What I say is important and what I write is important, but I myself, I'm not particularly important. And for me, what I photograph, and I do mostly still photography. On occasion, I've done video. I'm not very good at it. I don't like it. tell you the truth. I think it's a lazy person's way of recording things. Okay, I take still photographs, and to me, what I'm doing is I'm collecting data. You know, it's visual data. What I see, right, through the lens of my camera, and the photographs that I have are data of what has occurred. Now, mostly what I have photographed are in cities, although I've photographed quite a number of places also. And so I have, in essence, for Little Italy's, a pretty good record of the urban spaces and large cities, medium cities, small cities, even some suburbs, of what Italian Americans have done and preserved to some extent in the United States. And to me, it's wonderful to see it. I go back, you know, sometimes to these places. A number of cities that I've been thankful for having the opportunity to sleep over in places like Dom's house. You know, usually puts me out with the dog in the backyard, but it's a lot cheaper than paying for a hotel in Chicago. But it's given me the opportunity, you know, to see a lot of places and to visit a lot of places. Okay, I should tell you that, you know, with Dom winds up taking me to places that, you know, I ordinarily would not get to, that are Italian American places. But the last time I was in Chicago, I also photograph. Another part of the work that I do is I photograph a lot of Chinatowns as well. And it's interesting to see also this relationship between Chinatowns and Little Italy's. You know, there's I've noticed that in quite a number of cities where I photograph. Okay, so I should give you some kind of an idea about the extent of it. I have photographed, you know, once or twice, you know, in cities that you would imagine. In fact, you're here now. Tell me what cities in the United States ought I have photographed, right? Because again, I can learn from people, you know, where Little Italy is important. Little Italy, that's a difficult thing to say, right? We have to figure out another way of saying that term. Anyhow, where do you think I should have photographed? All right, so we'll have some interaction here. Anybody?
Washington.
Washington, D.C. Yes, I actually have, but they don't have a real Little Italy in the downtown. But they have a section where they used to live. Yeah, that's typical. It's typical. Yeah, it's typical of Italians in the late 19th century, early 20th century, to have grouped together. It's typical. They group together by family, and they group together by the places, you know, from where they come. So
well,
that
what I said was Walla, Washington.
Oh, Walla Walla, Washington. Thank you, Dom. You know, that's, if you go to live there and invite me to come and live in your backyard, I'll photograph that too. I was thinking people would be kind and say things like, "Well, Professor Krase, you don't have to call me." You know, what would be the ones that everybody thinks of? You know, the ones that think of is they think of New York City, right? And New York City has probably 10 or 15 Italian enclaves. And they have a Little Italy or two in every one of the 5 boroughs. And of course, you can imagine, I've you know, because I live in New York City, I live in Brooklyn. I've been photographing them since the 1970s, and that's like a half a century. You know, again, I don't look that old, but I've been doing that. Okay, and when you do that, it's another thing that happens. You do this, what's called repeat photography. Everybody does it, but they have a special term for it, repeat photography. You're able to see the visual changes in those neighborhoods, which also track with the other kinds of data, such as demographic change. So as you know, in most many, if not most, of these major cities where Italians had settled in the central city areas, right? And had preserved those areas for a long period of time. The last 20 years, they've been moving out. So you get to see that change. You get to see the change of the new groups coming in. For example, in Bensonhurst Brooklyn, which was one of the major Italian settlement areas in Brooklyn, it's now predominantly Chinese and also a good deal of Russians. And so you can see that. So you see the visual signs of that change. Some of you may also be familiar with Boston, so Boston's North End that I photographed. Since the 1970s, so, and I've been able to see those changes too. Now in Boston, a different kind of a change in the North End. And it's something also that I've seen elsewhere, including in Chicago, where what you see is the development of something I call an ethnic theme park. In other words, a place that's maintaining the appearance, or what people think of the appearance of a Little Italy is, even though the Italian population or the Italian American population has moved out. Right? So it's fascinating to see that.
I
In
suspect
Boston,
that when my father came over with his family in the turn of the century, 1915, many Italians were settling in a little town called Torrington, Connecticut. And I think that they probably have a huge population there. They probably even have a Little Italy, for all I know. But at the time, my grandmother's brothers, the Della Croces, they settled in Torrington, Connecticut. And at that time, I know that there were a lot of Italians that were in Torrington, that went to school in Torrington.
Okay, let me respond to that. Thank you very much. There's the Croce, the guy who opened up the tire place in Torrington. I photographed in Torrington.
Okay.
That was going to be one of the surprises that I had. You stole the the surprise from me. It's that people think it's only the big cities. Wherever I go. Torrington I know very well because I have a summer place, and I've actually written about in a couple of articles about Torrington, and there's a couple of things there. Yes, it had a very large Italian population. And it's several places that would have been called Little Italies. The north side of Torrington is one of them, and it's St. Peter and Paul's parish that's there. And they still have a Sons of Italy downtown. They have also, as typical of Little Italies throughout the United States, they have a monument to a Genoese sailor, Christopher Columbus. As you do in Chicago and in every place you go, they have one. Torrington, very large Italian population. Connecticut itself, you see,
yes, Connecticut is loaded with Italians.
With Italian Americans. Now most of them have moved out. I photographed also in New Haven, which also had many Italian sections. The one everybody is most familiar with is Worcester Street area. That I photographed.
I called the principal of one of the schools in the area where my dad lived there to find out how bilingualism played a role in placing the Italian immigrants who spoke no English, and he had no idea. And my guess is they just plopped them right in according to their ages with the various classes. But there was no such thing as bilingualism at that time.
Well, Yeah, let me say there probably were. There probably not so much bilingualism, but they had special schools as they had in New York. Connecticut is a pretty progressive state as far as education is concerned. So they probably had special programs for people who didn't speak English. Torrington also had a very elite Italians. All right, I have photographed and I observed and photographed around an upscale at the time, even from the 1920s, Italian section of the town where there is a house that's on the National Historic Registry. It's Micheli House, Micheli. I think that's the name of it, but it's a beautiful Italian Renaissance revival structure where the guy had a lot of money, was in the construction business, built a beautiful house, and they had a social club, a Northern Italian social club, right? So I have photographs of that also. So you run across that. And when the Italians came in large numbers to Torrington, okay, at that time, cities in Connecticut, industrial cities throughout Connecticut, were loaded with immigrants who began coming there, actually 1870s, 1880s. So Torrington, as was true of other places where I photographed, like Rochester, Troy, New York, Albany, I've been all over the place photographing, was loaded with other immigrants as well. And Torrington had a very large Middle Eastern population of Lebanese. You know, in fact, Ralph Nader's family is not from Torrington, from a town a little bit further north of Winstead. So they were mixed in with many of these other immigrants. And they established themselves in that city. And the Italian population now is not as large as it used to be. They tended to move out of the center of the city. All right, you're familiar with Torrington. Torrington had a pretty bad flood, as Winstead too. We kind of wiped out the downtown, but they're still there, established as they are in so many other cities, in all and large, in important occupations. They're in construction and stuff like that, and cars, and they own businesses, etc.
Shoemaking. Shoemaker still.
In Torrington?
Yeah.
Oh, really? I didn't even know they made films in Torrington.
Not films, I would say it's a shoemaker.
Oh, shoemakers. Okay, yeah. Yeah, unfortunately, a lot of people, they don't fix the shoes anymore.
Yeah.
They throw them out.
Yeah.
But again, so that's you led me right into the trap of Torrington. But Connecticut, Rhode Island, also Rhode Island is probably the state with the highest proportion of people of Italian descent. And there I photographed, of course, Providence, has one, and also a lot of these places, St. Louis, Chicago, Cleveland, New Orleans, San Francisco, wherever. I even found Italians out in Red Claw, Montana.
Yeah.
Because that's
follow the railroad.
Yeah, people don't realize that. There's a lot of Italians moved west, with other people looking for places to work. Okay, there were Italians that I have quite a number of times. I think 2 or 3 times I photographed the Italians in Denver, Colorado. And again, because I do this rephotography, you can see the changes. And this, again, I stress it all the time. Italians wound up getting, when they first came, places in cities where nobody really wanted to live. Italians made those places into livable, viable, I hear myself feedback, communities, and they stayed there, and they made them into wonderful places for them to live and to raise their children, and they stayed there. Now, if you go to Denver, what's interesting to see is they were first lived in what's called the flats area closer to the river that nobody else wanted to. And then they gradually moved up the hill. And that's another thing. I've seen this also in Pittsburgh, right? So they get the worst place, but they're used to living in places which are inhospitable, right? And so they learned their culture makes it possible for them to not only survive, but to thrive, right? And now that old Italian section in Denver is mostly Mexicanos, you know. So.
I'm listening to your very interesting talk, Jerome, and I was curious about 2 points. One is within your photography, your visual sociology, have you ever recorded Italians mixing with other groups, more with the bonding issue than the bridging issue than with the bonding issue? I mean, in time, were you able to see that Italians were also mixing with other ethnic groups? That was my first question. My second one is, since I have personally experienced what you would call the homecoming phenomenon, when you came back to Italy on your eventual visits, Laurino's not too far from where I live in Salerno. It's in Basilicata, actually, and it takes us 40 minutes to get to Laurino. Have you ever thought of using your photography or visual sociology in case you did have the opportunity to trace the homecoming of Italian Americans, those who came back to Italy?
Okay, I have to check with Dom first of all to find out whether people are allowed more than one question.
Oh, okay. Choose one of the two if you're not allowed to answer more than one, please.
Okay, I'll do both. I haven't done it. No, that would be. I think Anthony Riccio, I think, has published a book on his return to his hometown. Yeah, I think he's done that kind. I haven't done it. But my wife and I said my wife's father's family is from Laurino, and we did visit Laurino, and we visited some of her relatives there. And it was interesting. We had very little contact with them, but we did make contact through one of her cousins. So we went, we knocked on doors, we asked people. I could speak a little Italian to find their names. Di Gregorio is the people who are living there now. They're not the Nicoletti's, which is my father-in-law's name. And of course, everybody was very kind that brought us there. They were in the middle of a meal. Of course, they invited my wife and I in. We stayed there for a couple of hours, okay? And when we left, they were crying. You know, so yeah, it's a wonderful experience. For a guy like me, it's not something that I prefer. That we have a phone call here. Don't worry. I'm not going to be in the new cabinet. So it would be a wonderful thing to do. And I photographed in Laurino. Actually wrote an article about trying to get to Laurino, because my wife, I was on a research trip, and so we wound up going through Potenza to get to Laurino. Now, if you're Salinese, then you know how stupid it was for us to try.
Basilicata, yes.
Yeah.
I taught for 5 years in Potenza.
Okay, well, you know, we had the Italian, what's the Italian automobile club map, and I didn't know how to read it well. And I got on something which went from a paved 2-lane highway to an unpaved 1-lane highway to what essentially a muleteria, a mule trail in the mountains with this car in order to get to Laurino, okay? So you know that. And then I went down to Salerno also, which is where her family, that's where they left from. I left from
Oh.
Salerno. So I photographed all through there. So I don't know whether that's an answer to the first question. Now I'm so old.
Yes, just fine.
What is
Great.
the second question? I bet you
Oh, the second question is when you were carrying out your visual sociology experimentation in the United States, did you come across any chances or photographs or recordings of any kind about Italians mixing with other ethnic groups? I mean,
Yes.
bridging beyond the
Yeah.
bonding.
Well, yes, yeah. In fact, I've written about it where most people would be surprised by it. I've also given lectures on it. In fact, I gave one lecture I gave at a Jewish community center in Staten Island. Okay, and there was you may be familiar with the book. I can't remember the name now, but it was about Italians in Italy saving Jews from the fascists. And so we were talking about it, and I'm a sociologist, so I tried to explain to them why that is the case. And what it has to do with, at least in my opinion, right, is Italians have a very strong territorial culture, right? And they have very strong ties to their neighborhood and to their neighbors. All right. And so if people become their neighbors, which means not simply living next to them, okay, but become their neighbors over time, right? One sees they interact with each other, they observe one another, see what's going on, they make friends, they share this and share that. They have very strong ties. All right. Now this speaks nothing of other kinds of attitudes towards outsider groups. This has to do with neighbors. And what I've observed and have photographed also, but accidentally, I would never go out and say, oh, I want to take a picture of, here's an African-American and an Italian-American playing handball together or something or other. It simply happens. It simply occurs that way. And Italians, again, have lived in neighborhoods, as I mentioned before, right? Long after other people have left, right? So something, even though I'm a far left person, I'm like, so progressive that people don't even want to talk to me, right? Is that Italians, despite what people say about them, is they actually get along with their neighbors and have very strong ties to their neighbors. As also is represented in intermarriage statistics, etc. So even though they're seen as endogamous, but they tend to be endogamous in terms of the neighborhood. And people also don't understand Italian culture, is that Italians would see other Italians as outsiders as well. And so integrating with other Italians was a part of the process of integrating in American society. So yeah, there's a young Chinese scholar that I'm trying to help now. And what she's doing is she's looking into Italian-Chinese relationships. In fact, she's looking at romantic relationships, and she's interested in literature on that. And she's studying in different parts of the country. Going back to what I said is if you look to see where Italians had settled, right? Those areas changed, and what they changed around them first. And then the community itself began to get smaller and smaller. So, a lot of stereotypes about Italian Americans. At some level are true. I mean, in other words, being intolerant, right? But I don't think they're any more intolerant than other Americans. And if you look at them at the point of view of the neighbor level, you get a very different view. So people were saying to me when I was speaking on Italians and Jews in Italy, people don't understand. Jews have been in Italy for the longest, for thousands of years, right? And so they're part of the community, part of the neighborhood fabric, right? They're neighbors, and that's a very strong kind of bond. I could give you personal examples of it. I can give you examples from people that I know and observations of it, you know, and so it seems to me to be quite common. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Jerry.
Okay.
That was very nice for you to answer my questions. I
Okay.
learned many things.
Okay. If you know, you can always contact me, and I can send you stuff that I've written. You know, some of it is really not too boring.
Your email is what? Jerry? Is
J.
there-
No, the AOL is not good because it's J. Krase. Okay, I put it in chat. See if I put it. J. Krase at Brooklyn.
Okay, while Jerry's doing that, I'm going to ask him the current question on how does he explain the strong support that President Trump has received from the Italian Americans?
No comment.
No comment is right. It's sad.
I can tell you culturally what it is. All right, and I've written about this also. If you wish and you want to get my unedited response to the question, is read my Trace's blog on iitaly.org. I've written about it quite a bit, you know, and you know what it's and I've done analysis of. I do lots of things. I just don't take pictures. I've done analysis of the election data in New York City, you know, which tracks very high with areas that are predominantly Italian American. They still are. So in New York City, those Italians American areas are no longer much in the boroughs like Brooklyn, etc., but they're in Staten Island, right? But also, I would ask, you know, how do you explain the connection with Orthodox Jews and conservative Jews and Trump too, right? So, and why did Cuban Americans in Miami vote for Trump? You see, I think for each population, this is where the Democratic Party that I used to do some work, not paid work, for, particularly at the national level, they're some of the stupidest people that you can imagine. All right, they have no sense of how media works for people. Right, people don't read national messages; they read messages that make sense to them. Right. So for Italian Americans, looking at not so much necessarily Trump himself, but in terms of conservative policies that he was speaking of in favor of, they made sense to them. They're very concerned about neighborhoods, neighborhood preservation. So this idea about people going to move into your neighborhood, et cetera, this threat. The idea that was, again, spread around in the media that they listened to. You know, they listen to Fox News. They read in New York City, it's the New York Post, etc. So they were getting that message that look at the Black Lives Matter thing. I supported Black Lives Matter, but the way that what happened in cities throughout the country, you saw this violence. Okay, and anybody who lives in cities was moved by that. You know, if progressives and socialists, et cetera, like me, we say, well, we can understand it, right? But if you have a strong connection to your neighborhood, you don't understand that. It's not something that you understand. Cubans in Miami, these are all people who left Cuba who were more in favor of Batista than they were of Fidel Castro. So the message that they got was about, well, Biden's going to come in and it's going to be socialism like Cuba. You know, Biden is more of a capitalist, you know, than Trump is. Actually, Biden is quite familiar with those kinds of things. He comes from a state which is a big state of banking and credit cards, right? So that's the explanation. The explanation is to look at what's important to Italian Americans and see how these two different sides, you know, were presenting themselves, and one appealed more than the other. One appealed more than the other. But I could tell you also that among Italian Americans, you know, women tended not to vote for Trump. That as one increased the educational level, they didn't vote for Trump, right? So you have that kind of stuff. But what can I say?
Okay, Jerry, after being involved in Italian American studies for 50 years or more, what's the bottom line? What have you learned? What's the future look like?
Are you talking about the future of Italian American studies or the future of Italian Americans, which are two separate things?
Well, tell me about both of them.
Well, yes, I have been involved in Italian American studies. You may not realize it, but 50 years ago, almost 50 years ago, I was the director of the Center for Italian American Studies at Brooklyn College with a name like Krase, right? And I'm going to tell you this is like autoethnography, all right? Why was I director of the Center for Italian American Studies at Brooklyn College? All right? This is a rhetorical question. I don't expect you to answer it. I'll tell you the answer. It's because it didn't pay anything, right? And nobody wanted it. Right? That's why, okay? And it continues really today, is there seems to be very little in the way of incentive for Italian Americans or non-Italian Americans to commit themselves to a career of studying and promoting Italian Americans. And that's, right now there's a thing at Brooklyn College also where an old friend of mine, Luigi, I shouldn't mention his name, anyhow, is complaining because they want to eliminate the the teaching of Italian language at Brooklyn College, right? Now, how did that happen? Well, it had happened because students weren't interested in studying Italian. Why weren't students interested in studying Italian? Because there weren't too many people out there promoting the importance of the study of Italian language and culture. And I think Italian language and culture is important whether you're Italian or not. But there are very few people doing that because it's not supported. I've had arguments with, not that I'm an argumentable, a guy who argues a lot, okay? But I've had arguments with people from the Italian consulate. I haven't seen them in ages, but I remember back when in New York City, there's a very large Italian population, and they had a Scuola d'Italia, right? But the Scuola d'Italia was only for the Italians who were associated with the consulate, right? They were only reaching out to the prominenti in New York City. And I went up to, and I'm not going to tell you the guy's name because I don't think I can remember it. And I said, what you ought to be doing is you ought to be reaching out to the Italian American population of New York City, right? And bringing to them, right? Cultivating them and their children. Of course, it went over like a lead balloon. Come si dice in Italiano, lead balloon, right?
Lead balloon?
Okay, lead balloon, right? It didn't go anywhere. And I've had that argument many, many times. And I've had it also, I hope there are a couple of Italian American scholars here, right? It's also your fault, right? Because you haven't done it either, because people avoid the scholars, the elite, the prominenti, the artists, the poets, that, don't want to, what they think of lowering themselves to reach out to the Italian American population, right? They avoid places where they congregate. They really do.
I think
they have to do it. If you can't complain about lack of interest if you don't promote the interest. It's not something that comes from your blood, right? It comes from learning and education, right?
Yeah, I agree with that. Am I on, Dom?
Yes.
Because it was very difficult for me to retain members of the Dante group that we have established at Casa Italia. And you would have thought that the numbers would be just pouring in, but they're not. And I think that the Italian literature in Dante is so filled with beauty, and not only in terms of the poesia, but in terms of the content of what Dante 700 years ago was saying. It's still relevant today. And it is very difficult to get people to stay. Right now, we have a group of about 7 people who are solid. And we go into each terzina and discuss the meaning of it. And I find it that the Italians do not know of Dante, or will they commit themselves to the intensity of the study of Dante?
Yeah, I think it's
Yeah,
really tough.
Yeah, I don't have an answer to that except to say it requires work, and it's something that should have been going on for a long period of time. And you know, I know from my profession, from my stand, I know when I was president of the American Italian Historical Association, I followed this other fellow with the Italian name, the Candeloro there. I was secretary, treasurer, this and that, vice president and president, etc. And at the period when Dom and I were the leaders in this particular area, we had great connections to the wider Italian American community. And as the organization began to say, well, we want to be more elite, we want to appeal more to academia, right? It distanced itself from that larger group, and it can't survive that way. You can have two, you can have parallel things, okay? But you must have that outreach. Otherwise, when you're looking for support, there's very little there. How much more time do we have, Dominic? Because I have some.
Well, we're open-ended, but we're reaching about the limit that most people can give to a Zoom.
Okay. What I'd like to do is I'd like to.
Let's go around and ask if there are any final questions. Anybody wants to?
Yeah, but I'd like to show some of my photographs at some point.
Oh, Mary Gibson?
Yes. Hi, Jerry. I was
Hi.
just asking you a question. Did you know my cousin, Carlo Chisura? He's a big deal there in Brooklyn. And also, just to let you know, I get this thing too because my hair is dark that people think I'm younger than I am, but I'm an old lady. I see an old lady when I look in the mirror. But my parents were born in the 1890s and early 1900s, and they came from Sicily, from Sinagra, and my father was born in Ucria. My father was in the First World War. People look at me and say, oh, that can't be possible, but he was. And so those are my questions to you. Did you know that little town Sinagra, or the little town Ucria where my father was born? And do you know my cousin Carlo Chisura, who's kind of a big deal there in Brooklyn?
I don't know the two towns, but I've heard the name for Carl. Is he involved in politics in the borough?
My cousin lives in Brooklyn area. He's a pretty big deal there in Brooklyn.
I said, but a big deal in what sense?
Oh, I think he's the president of the building commission or something.
Right,
New York,
yes.
or something like that.
I don't know. He's not a close friend of mine, but tell him to call me up and invite me over for dinner when the COVID is over. I'm happy to.
I certainly will. We talk over the Facebook and that kind of thing. I never get out much anymore because of the COVID. But yeah.
Anybody else? Peter Perro, do you have a comment?
No, I wanted to see Jerry's pictures. That's one reason I tuned in today.
Okay, so
let's
I'd
go
like
to
to
the
see.
pictures.
okay, I'm going to share the screen. It's a random selection, but it'll give some sense of what it is that I do. Okay, so we're going to share my. This will be a little bit disconcerting, perhaps. Okay, can you see the screen?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Everybody know what that is? Okay, this is the Little Italy on Mulberry Street. It's going to be disconcerting. because I've just grabbed a bunch of them. One of the reasons that I have this photograph, which I've done a number of times, is to see this changing of Little Italy. If you see on the right-hand side and look in the interior of the block, you can see the Chinatown, which is part of the thing. But looking at that tenement building also, right? And you can see down the block there, you can see some new buildings as well. And this is happening in many of the inner city Little Italies. The property value is very, very high now. And so even though the is being maintained as a Little Italy, ethnic theme park, it's changing. Okay, this you guys would see. You know where that is, right?
Yeah, right here.
Yeah.
Well,
Taylor Street.
former
Yeah.
Sports Hall of Fame.
This is from my last visit there. I've got quite a number of photos. Okay, this one here. Okay, this is Little Italy in the Bronx. Welcome, Belmont. Arthur Avenue. Some you see that it's there, and I photographed them many times.
The Belmonts are from there, huh?
Yeah, well, actually, they are. Yeah. Does anybody know any songs from them?
Yeah, of course.
Well, name me one. Name me one, and I'll sing it for you.
Yeah, Jerry's very musical.
Run around Sue.
I don't like that one. Okay, we come up with another one, and I'll do it. I could sing. And now the end is near, and so I face the final curtain. Guess who that is? Anyhow,
Frank.
Not sure.
yeah, that was Frankie. But that's Hoboken. That's Hoboken. Yeah. Now this is another picture from New York City. This is what they call Nolita, right? This is Little Italy, but it's going north in Little Italy, which become a very chic place. And at least what it's maintaining is some of the Italian ambiance, but more of the Italian ambiance and less of the Italian American ambiance. Okay, if you look up here, yeah, if you can see on this right hand.
Johnny lives?
Excuse me?
Does Adriana Trigiani live there? Does she live there?
I don't know. She's another one I don't know, but tell her, give me a call. Okay. Yeah, if you see in the lower right-hand corner of this thing here, this is actually where it's St. Patrick, the old St. Patrick's church is in New York City. But this is Nolita. It's very, very highly gentrified. Okay. This one here, okay, this is probably from the 1980s. This is in Philadelphia. All right. This little place over here is where I go, where they still sell pretty good cannoli. Okay. Okay. This you can see. This is the Banca d'Italia, and also in Philadelphia. You see, Banca d'Italia. There's a Banca d'Italia. There's a Banca di Sicilia, etc. These kind of remnants of the Italian occupation of the area, which is, again, that Philadelphia is very, very gentrified. This is an old part of New York City. This is Minetta Lane, which was written about in the late 19th century, early 20th century as really a slummy place where Italians live, Minetta Lane. Again, this is what it's like now. Okay. This is Our Lady of Mount Carmel Church in the South Village. I was on the committee for the preservation of Greenwich Village, and we got a landmarks designation for this South Village to honor the immigrant, particularly the Italian population of that area.
Still there?
St. Lady of Mount Carmel's, yeah, they're still there. They're still there.
Oh, okay.
Okay. Can't even remember where the heck this is. Yeah.
That's right here. Here.
Yeah.
That's on Taylor Street in Chicago.
Oh, amazing, isn't it?
I recognize that.
Yeah.
Paci Pizza, Paci Pizzeria.
Yeah. No, I know. I'm just wondering whether anybody went to it. But it's interesting to me, again, that I do a lot of writing on these ethnic theme parks, et cetera, but this is not at all what the neighborhood was like when it was Italian. You know, it's amazing to me that people still think that Italians lived in neighborhoods where every store was a restaurant where you would charge a lot of money for a bowl of pasta. Okay, this of course you know.
Sports hall.
It's in storage now. They will open the new Sports Hall of Fame on Harlem Avenue supposedly next spring.
Okay. I also collect, of course, this is not mine. This is the Cafe Bella Napoli, which I had a photo of now from the 1950s. Okay. Now I want you to notice something. If you look at the old photos, in other words, when the neighborhood was mostly Italian, it looks totally different, right? It's totally, even though it might be the same place, it's not the same, right? In other words, when you take the Italians out of a place, right, it's no longer, as far as I'm concerned, an Italian place. You understand? There's this commodification of the Italian, and I think the last one that I have to show you, and you can guess where this is, right? Or you can read it on top. This is Baltimore. This is the Baltimore's Little Italy, and there's a whole row of buildings that have these this kind of outside stuff. Okay. Anyhow, so that's just a small sample of the photographs. You know, if you had a couple of months for me to do this, I could show you more. Now it's getting very dark in here.
What happened? The sun going down?
Oh, no, the sun.
I have a question.
Hold on a second. I'm going to put a light on. I'm getting spooked out here. All right.
Okay, Jeanette, go ahead with your question.
Okay.
I graduated from Rutgers, and I won't tell you what year, so we went into New York quite a bit. I wonder if Ferrara's is still there.
Yeah,
And we used to shop it.
Yeah, Ferrara's
Is it
is
still
still
there?
there. Yeah, Ferrara's is still there. I have photographs of it in its different iterations. Yeah, it stayed. Ferrara's also they've expanded a lot of the you know, because of the tourist trade, and a lot of the restaurants, the cheese store, all this kind of stuff. Those that were there before, I simply changed in the sense of serving the tourists.
What about the Italian American Museum that is?
It's yeah, Joe Schelzer is a friend of mine, and you know, it's under construction. There was an old building that was there that he had used for that was donated to the Italian American Museum that he was using for exhibitions and lectures. That building has been torn down.
Okay.
And in its place, I think what's going up is like a 4 or 5 story building, which will have will have rental space in it, and then also exhibition space.
Oh, okay. You don't know the schedule on that.
No, but you can go on they have a website, a very good website, iam.org, something like that.
Oh.
Take a look. They're all, and of course, he's always constantly doing fundraising. Okay. Well, COVID's been good to you.
Yeah, sure has. Jerry, some parting remarks?
Excuse me?
Parting remarks.
Oh, parting remarks? Well, not really. I never stopped talking. But I'm very happy to have met all of you. I hope you're as happy to meet me or re-meet me, if that's a proper term, as I am. I hope I got across to you my main message, is the importance of ordinary Italian Americans, like myself. I'm also a worker, and what we have contributed to this country, which really gets unnoticed. Although I could sing a final verse, on the way out.
Okay, well, as you do that, we'll give you a round of applause like they do on The View.
Ah,
Yeah.
Thank you. But yeah,
Thank you very much, Jerry.
Yeah.
Nice